Hey everybody, Joe here. Today I'm going to show you my newest DIY. It's my belt squat pit that I built for less than $200. And it's a little bit different than the pit I made in my last video you may have watched. It's built completely different. It does take up a little bit more space, but it's so much better and I'm really enjoying using it. And I'm going to show you a little bit of why I went with this and why I didn't use the other one. Okay, I did use the other one, but as you can see, it's quite a bit different and it works a lot differently. It's more of a pendulum type. It just hangs straight down and goes into a pit, whereas this one's cantilevered. And there were definitely some pros and cons to this one. The biggest pros for the old pit were that it was very compact. You could just push this thing in a corner. It was really, really small. It was a little cheaper, but not really that much. And there was no plate matching. You could just load the pin. You didn't need to have equal plates on each side. It was a single pin. And the other biggest pro was it challenged your stabilizers. You know, you had to hang that pendulum down through the hole and everything, and you were thrown a little off balance. The cons were it felt a little cramped. As you can see, even in the picture, I'm a little cramped there. The mechanism was awkward to place the weight on the carriage was awkward. The action was awkward. And it was probably a little bit less safe. So I started working on another design. I'm not going to show you anything on pictures of anything because I might get a copyright strike, but this is what they look like. You probably have seen them. I'll leave a link in the description. You can look at them yourself. But immediately I zeroed in on a serious problem with all of them, and that was this front pivot here. Now, ignore that 3 feet because that's not how high they make theirs. The problem with that pivot point being so low is like this. If you see someone doing one of these landmines in the gym, I'll just use this as an example, this bar here. It's just an example. Once you start to push the weight, pull the weight up, the load gets pushed towards the floor. Okay, we're at 5 pounds in the bottom position here. You notice as the bar starts to go up, the load starts to shift towards the floor. That looks kind of weird, don't it? The load shifts towards the floor and the weight goes down. So you can see it's 4 pounds. It'll go down to almost 3 pounds in the upward position. So your advantage there, you're not getting as challenged at the top of the weight where it's actually easiest to lift the weight. And then as you go back down, of course, it gets heavier. So when I designed mine, I decided that I would raise that fulcrum point higher than any of the machines I saw to that 3 feet that you saw in the first picture. And what this does is it helps advantage the weight against you. So you're disadvantaged, in other words, when you're lifting the weight. So when you're in the upright position, as you can see here, the weight is actually lower than the fulcrum point in the front. So that actually challenges you more in the upright position where the exercise is easier. And there's an extra added benefit to that also, and that is you got to buy less plates to weigh yourself down. So it's a great consideration. The next consideration is the length of the carriage. The shorter it is, obviously, the quicker the load would get pushed towards the floor. Of course, the longer that it is, the more difficult it is for you because more force is put towards your end. So again, disadvantage to you is good. So the next step was to actually get the real dimensions so that I could determine whether this thing would even fit in the area that I've got. And I decided I'd break out AutoCAD and now I came to my senses. I don't know anything about AutoCAD. I broke out some graph paper and did it the old-fashioned way. And this actually works good. Each of these is an element that would have to go in the room: desk, bench area, treadmill, and squat rack, in order to fit it all in the room. And I figured out the best way and the best feng shui, and it worked out really nicely. So then I got really serious about design. You know, what were the actual sizes of the pieces of lumber and so forth that I was going to use, and what materials was I going to need to build this thing. And as you can see, I way overbuilt it. So I went out and I got all the lumber I needed and got my cut list together and started to build the carriage first. And then I went on inside. That dog didn't help at all. And I went on to start building it inside instead of carrying all this heavy lumber inside. So it's mostly 2x6s and 2x8s. And as it came together, I got a better and better idea of how everything was going to function as far as what size pins I would need and so forth. I used black pipe. Now that one right there was going to be the original weight carriage. And I was going to load the plates onto the front of that like so. But they were going to get in the way. So I had to change that idea, and I put this vertical pipe or this horizontal pipe through here. and that's what's actually going to hold the weight. But if you notice, I did actually keep the smaller pipe for small weight incremental changes without having to put one on each end, which is cool. So again, don't have to match plates. And generally speaking, you're only going to put maybe 3 to 5 pounds every time you go up in weight. So it's actually worked out pretty good. The next most critical component is the actual eyelet that you hook your whatever device you're pulling with. This one will hold 2,200 pounds. It's, I think, a National Hardware. I'll leave a link, but you can probably find it at your hardware store. Now, of course, that bolt's going to hold everything, so I didn't want to screw around with it. My old man had this thing like 50 years ago, this big washer. No idea what he used it for, but I know what I'm using it for. I kept it all this time. And I double nutted it, so I put a regular nut, and then I put a lock nut, a nylon nut on top of that and tightened them together. So there's no way that thing's pulling through there. Next up, these carabiners. Even the ones that they give you with like really heavy chains and stuff are complete garbage. Look at this thing. It doesn't line up. It barely locks. The spring sucks. They're not rated at anything. There's no telling what these things will or will not hold. So I would absolutely not use these for what I'm doing. So I was going to use actual climbing carabiners, but those are super fiddly to use. So I went with these Everbuilt 540-pound working load limit. They call them spring links, and you can get these pretty much anywhere, but I'll leave a link in the description. This will definitely do. All right, so let's do a squat. We'll hook the belt up to the carriage, and we'll lift the carriage off the catch and push the catch forward. I'll show you a close-up of that. So the carriage comes off the catch, and the catch goes forward. And then you got the handle on the catch to help balance you, and you can do a nice deep squat. You can always tighten up the belt connection to make it go even deeper. That's as deep as I go. So when you're done, just pull the catch back in and rest the carriage on it. And that ain't going nowhere. All right, I figured at this point it'd be a good idea to give you some construction close-ups so you can see the actual constructions. You can see these are 2x6s, and these are stacked up, and they are screwed and glued together. And I did not use deck screws. I used construction screws. There is a big difference. I'll show you that in a second. Now this catch that I call it, which catches the weight and holds it for you safely, is made out of 2x6s sandwiched in between 2x4s. So the 2x6s are down in there, and they catch this pipe that goes through the carriage, which I call that. And that pivots on black pipe down here. And the interesting thing is a lot of the length turned out to where there was just enough extra that I could use plates as washers. So it makes it kind of look cool too. And again, you can see that laminated, 6 thick. And that's just not going anywhere. And 2x8s sandwiched in between 2x6s in the back. So I wanted a little bigger footprint back here so this wouldn't like rock back and forth. It's really solid, And then there's the deck. And I built that just like you would a deck. I built it out of 2x6s. I did use deck screws going down in there, and that's the only place I did that. And these are your typical deck screw. You see them all the time. Let me get this to where you can see it. And that is not meant for shear forces going up and down like this. They'll snap. What you want is these kind of screws. These are these Torx screws, and they're made for construction. They're, I'll leave a link, but it doesn't really matter. I don't recommend you build this machine anyway. It's on you, but I'm just showing you how I did it. So those are meant for those types of shear forces. So there's the basic construction of it. I might do something a little more detailed at another time, but just don't want this video to get too long. And then, this is just what pushes and pulls the carriage, and all that is just some 2x4s put together. I drilled a hole in the end and just used broom handles because it's good enough. I didn't really need anything super solid. This isn't steel or metal or anything, and it pushes it back and forth, no problem. I got to put a little weight plate in there as a washer. Haven't really done that yet, but so I think from all that I've told you so far, you can kind of see what I've done here and how it functions, and it works really cool, and I'm really pleased with it. So there it is, my DIY belt squat pit for under $200.